from D-Lab. This is part 3 of the VibroVerb custom amp build. She's really coming along nicely. I've got most of the components mounted and underside is ready for termination. So let me show you where I'm at. I think you're going to like this. So we'll start top side on the VibroVerb. I've got the cat board all populated with the nice FNT filter capacitors, carbon resistors, plenty of room for the cover to be installed. Transformers are all mounted and the wiring is swung underneath, ready to be connected. Now for the good stuff, let's go bottom side. Alright, bottom side of the VibroVerb. She's really coming along well, as you can see. I'll shoot this at 2 angles so you can see the back side with our tube sockets and the front side with the controls. I did the typical Fender twisted pairs at right angles to the sockets to reduce noise. If we travel over here, you'll see that I took my 6-volt AC filaments out of the power transformer and went direct to the first output tube. Alright, so normally Fender would swing this high current line up to the lamp holder and then go back to the tubes. I don't like to do that because I don't want to send high current up here and back over here. So I always take the 6-volt AC, land it, hit the next socket, continue on down the line, and then there's some 20 gauge twisted pair here that goes up to feed the little GE47 lamp. So I've got those terminal boards wired that I talked about in the second video. So this is our 120 AC input. Our ground is waiting. I don't have the line cord hooked up yet. Over here is our ground bus. So you've got the center tap of the high voltage and the 6-volt AC there. And that provides me a ground point for the bias system. Out of this rubber grommet, we've got the choke lines and the output transformer primary. And I've already landed the primary leads to the output tubes, and this red one will be the hot feed that's going to go to the power supply, which is not wired yet. We've got our little 470 ohm screen resistors and the 1.5K grid resistors in place. So now we move to the Eyelet board. It is fully populated. I use high quality capacitors. All the connections have been checked and double checked. I got ground runners shooting down to the brass plate, which I'll show you here in a minute. She's looking good. I've got some wiring ready to be landed on the tube sockets, and I color coded those, so we have the red for plate, black for cathode, and there will be white coming down here on some of the signal lines, but for the inputs I used shielded cable. So this is the RG174 coax. That'll be for signal in, and the volume pot leads. Alright, let's turn this thing around and you can see the control lineup. We'll start over here. This is the negative bias rectification and filter board, which feeds the Allen Bradley bias adjustment pot. Okay, none of that's wired in. None of the controls are actually wired into the board yet. But down here I wanted to point out a special cable. This is the power supply leads that come up from the doghouse above. Back in the day, Fender would route this power supply cabling over and then they wrapped it with red wire. They spiraled it and they connected that to the ground plate to reduce hum. I decided to up the game by using some surplus braid that I had, so I slid that over the wires, put heat shrink on it, and then I have a little ground runner here that will be hooked to the brass plate. Just trying to up the game a little bit on ground integrity. I talked about the RG174 coax. That is going to the input jacks and the volume pots. Okay. The reason I did this is back in the day, Fender would simply use a straight conductor. They'd route it through these holes, it'd go under the Eyelet board and go to the inputs of the preamps, and those are noise generators. So it's always good to take a little extra time, use some shielded cable. This is only grounded on this side. Over here, where it goes to the tube sockets, that ground will just float and be heat shrinked. If you look down here, we have our bare wire, which is the grounds. and those will be soldered to the brass plate. I have the central ground, which is also bonded to the chassis, and this line comes up from the power supply board. So this is the preamp ground, and if you go over here through that main harness, this would be the power ground. So this would be for the high voltage section that drives the 6L6s. They've separated that on the cat board. I found that that was pretty interesting, but I understand why they did it. Remember, we want to keep power grounds over here, preamp grounds over here. That was Fender's little trick to reduce noise, and it still works today. So there's where we're at on the Vibroverb custom build. She's coming along really nicely, and I'm taking a lot of time for wire routing and making improvements on grounding because I want this thing to be noise free. We'll see if I can accomplish that. Okay. So in the next video, I should have all the controls and the tube sockets wired up, and we can do an initial power up and see if we can get a signal through the amp. So that should be really cool. I have another piece of information for you guys. I talked to MojoTone, and they also make a kit of the Vibroverb. I think it's the Brownface though. And I'm having conversations with them about getting one of the kits up here, and we're going to build that one step by step, just like we're doing this one. So that should be very cool. I'll keep you guys posted on that. Hope you liked the video. Remember, the next one, we should be able to hear this thing sing.